Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the House Appropriations Committee Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. Today we are hearing from the Department of Agriculture and also from the MTA. We're going to begin with agriculture if you want to make your way forward to the desk. And we will have Andrew Gray give us a rundown on the summary of the information that has been compiled for your department, and then we will hear from the department itself. Mr. Gray, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will now present the Maryland Department of Agriculture's fiscal 2026 operating budget analysis. On page 1, you see there that the budget decreases around $6.9 million, or 5.2%, to $125.9 million. In terms of the fiscal 2024 actions noted on page 2, there was a closeout action that was interesting. It was a reversion of $2.2 million in general funds that was for the tree plantings under the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program under the Tree Solutions Now Act. And that's going to come up as a Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act consideration. The agency is not able to use the full $2.5 million, and therefore there's actually a BRFA provision to reduce that amount by $2 million. In terms of cost containment, on page 2, the Board of Public Works did have a meeting in July 2024. The largest action for agriculture is on $2.3 million reduction for the Rural Maryland Council. In terms of the legislative priorities on page 3, it appears that everything's moving quickly in terms of moving the funding out, reimbursing, seeking reimbursements, except for the agriculture wayfinding signs in Montgomery County. And MDA comment a little bit more about that. In terms of the proposed deficiency, the largest, a couple of deficiencies noted there, generally for kind of administrative purposes or for operating purposes. The overview of agency spending is shown on Exhibit 1 on page 5. Office of Resource Conservation is it's a little bit more than half of the overall agency's budget. This is where the cover crop program of $25 million is budgeted, and also salaries for that program. And then for the Office of Marketing, Animal Industries and Consumer Services, salaries, and then also this is where Rural Maryland Council grants are budgeted as well. In terms of the proposed budget change, Exhibit 2 on page 7 reflects that for the personnel, it's about a $3.4 million change due to where the funding is or where it is not included for fiscal 2025 and 2026 for salaries. There are contractual conversions, of 8 of them for about $523,000, and new regular positions, 6.3 for $467,000. In terms of some of the agricultural policy, there's a watershed implementation plan federal fund grant increase for $2 million. My understanding is that money will not be received, and DLS has a recommendation to reduce that funding. There's also the grant funding for the new Maryland Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming, is around $785,000 increase based on the information we have. And one of the largest decreases on the next page is for the Maryland Agriculture and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation's General Fund grants, around $3.3 million because the Marbidco is now self-sufficient. In terms of some of the contingent reductions, I'll just highlight there the $250,000 reduction for the Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland. This is a multi-year proposal to phase out funding for the program. And the largest decrease actually in the agency is at the very bottom of the chart on page 8. And this is for the Modernization Program Information Technology Project. And this is based on when the reimbursable funds come into the budget. So they came in the budget in fiscal 2025. They're not showing up yet in fiscal 2026, and therefore it looks like a very large decrease in funding. Moving now to that recommendation for the $2 million reduction is on page 9. And on page 10, MDA should comment a little bit about their information technology projects. One project, at least based on the information provided to us, is a significant increase in funding, around $4.5 million, $4.4 million increase. And then there's also another project which is tremendous amount of money over a number of years, but the funding has really been concentrated in fiscal 2027. The expenditure around $29.4 million in that 1 year, which is almost half of the overall project cost. Obviously, that'd be a concern, so the agency should comment on that. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act proposals are noted on page 11 and 12, and that information in 13. The largest component there is the reduction of the mandated funding for the tree planting on agricultural land, and that's around $2 million reduction in fiscal 2025 and fiscal 2026. Then moving on now to personnel data on page 15. MDA's positions increased by 14.3. That's 8 regular or contractual conversions, so a person who's in a contractual full-time equivalent and they're being moved to a regular position. And then there's also 6.3 new positions reflected. So those are people to be hired. They're not in a position right now. Of those 6.3, the 0.3 really is to take somebody who's a part-time assistant attorney general and take them up to being a full-time. So 6 new positions. DLS did note that there were a tremendous number of vacancies as of December 31, 2024, around 45. Therefore, it appeared at that time that it would be prudent to use those vacancies for the position filling instead of making brand new positions. MDA has done a phenomenal job of hiring since the time that we received data, and then we'll argue that that doesn't make sense anymore, and it doesn't look like it makes as much sense. All right, moving down to page 17. We've asked MDA to comment on why its vacancy rate has increased so much, and the answer would be that it hasn't, because they've actually been able to hire a bunch of positions, stealing their fire a little bit here. In terms of the key observations on page 18, the first one concerns the highly pathogenic avian influenza. This is a reimbursement funding that's being sought from the federal government. The concern was that due to some of the, I guess, considerations at the federal level, MDA was not clear on whether it would receive reimbursement for the work it's doing in the avian influenza area, which is obviously a concern due to the kind of pandemic that's occurring on the eastern shore and in one backyard flock in Montgomery County. So MDA should discuss the status of that reimbursement, any communication it's had with its federal funding agencies, and in general about how the funding is used for highly pathogenic avian influenza. Second issue or key observation on page 18 concerns electric vehicle charging station inspection. So 2 components there. There was a committee narrative in the Joint Chairman's report from 2024, and there was also a bill that required a work group to look at this issue of who's really going to be doing the work of not just accuracy, but also reliability for the charging stations in Maryland. So currently, MDA has the authority for accuracy, making sure that the charge is right, but they don't have responsibility. Nobody is clearly in charge of reliability in terms of how much time each of those charging stations is up. So it's not enough that it's functional in terms of giving you the right charge if it's not up and running for people to be able to use them. So this is a question, this is something that was kind of addressed more explicitly by the work group that was looking at this issue. Exhibit 5 on page 20 shows some of the costs that were estimated from that work group to look at kind of what would the cost be for looking at reliability, that second component that MDA does not currently have. So a couple of agencies noted there that potentially or could work in this sphere, and then they have a just kind of broad range of costs that look like it would cost them to do the work over a 4-year and 10-year period, with the Maryland Department of Agriculture looking to be most expensive and the Public Service Commission being the most inexpensive of the options noted there. However, that does reflect the data as of a particular point in time in terms of when the data was available for the report. Exhibit 6 on page 2021 shows for just Maryland Department of Agriculture only the components of the reliability and accuracy in terms of what its overall needs are, in terms of the kind of startup costs and the year-to-year costs as well. So additional funding is needed for the work to be done for accuracy, which MDA already has the authority for. And then if you were to layer on reliability, more funding would be needed beyond that as well. There's still a concern, though, that there's no clarity on which agency will be responsible for reliability in Maryland. MDA should discuss whether there's any further discussion about that point and the funding in the 2026 budget for the work of MDA's accuracy work. Maryland Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming program is noted on page 22. So this is a new program that is coming in an administration bill, discussed a little bit in the Chesapeake Bay overview. The idea is to really kind of focus on the good conservation practices that are being implemented by farmers, and also the farmers who are doing environmental and kind of agricultural community work as well. Little concern here is $900,000 in the budget, but it's a little unclear as to what the real intent was, because the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act reduced the amount of money that apparently looked like it would be available for this purpose. So it was reducing from $2.5 million for tree planting to $500,000. The policy bill that creates the program looks like it was going to use the remaining amount of general funds from tree planting for the program, but there wouldn't be any if the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act reduces the funding for tree planting down to $500,000. There's also some concerns about how much money was really reflected for contracts versus grants, whether there's one position or two positions being noted there. Different information was provided for the fiscal note as well as compared to the budget analysis. So therefore, MDA should comment on the intent of how the program will be funded long-term, since one source of funding proposed in legislation would not be viable based on the BRFA of 2025. And DLS recommends reducing the appropriation for the program from $900,000 to $500,000, since it is the first year of a program. And then in addition, to restrict that funding, or to basically make the funding contingent on whether there's actually a program created by the policy bill. And finally, to restrict $100,000 of the program funding until a report is submitted on the final actions to be taken, the final work to be done by the program, the contracts and grants and the positions. On page 22, there's just a brief discussion about value-added agriculture in Maryland. More work needs to be done. It's tremendously important. However, we don't have good data on how the industry looks, how it's doing in Maryland. Maryland Department of Agriculture did look at licenses, various processing licenses that span multiple agencies, but that really kind of just a big total number. It doesn't really kind of give you a feeling for how is the, kind of the granular level of value-added agriculture doing in Maryland. And DLS is recommending that MDA comment on why the MFR measures weren't more detailed, I guess, in terms of what was included. There was a managing for results measure kind of included in the fiscal 2026 budget submission, but it was rather kind of broad. The outcomes of the 2020-25 Buyer Grower Expo that was held in January. This is a very important opportunity to expand marketing and sales for local products. Relationship between value-added licenses at the various levels of government and the growth and health of the value-added agriculture industry in Maryland. The work MDA and the Maryland Department of Health are doing to reduce the regulatory hurdles. And then also the fiscal 2026 funding to promote the expansion of value-added agriculture, as well as the overall goals for our value-added agriculture in Maryland. The fifth and final issue or key observation concerns enforcement, inspection, position strength, and assessment, vacant position filling report. The report was not submitted. MDA notes that it was a combined report with the Maryland Department of the Environment. Maryland Department of the Environment has not submitted it, and therefore it's not come to us. So DLS is recommending that that narrative be added again to include that report for the next reporting year. On page 26 is the first recommendation there is to reduce the 6 new positions and funding due to the idea at the time the DLS received the vacancy data, there was plenty of vacancies to fill those positions. The second piece there is to restrict the $500,000 to be $500,000 for the Maryland Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming Program, contingent on the actual policy bill creating the program. And then there's the next page, recommendation number 3 on page 27, is to reduce $400,000 for the program just because it is the first year of the program, just to kind of see how it goes. And then to delete funding for that $2 million federal fund grant that's not going to be received. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. And we will move to the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Addix, to provide a response, and then we're going to have some questions for you, and then we'll have the witnesses that are here be able to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Kevin Addix, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Honored to be here with you today to answer any questions. First, again, we do a lot of thanking Mr. Gray for his analysis. It's always helpful. And frankly, we learn a lot from every conversation. So that is good and it's helpful. We have provided written responses to all of the queries from Mr. Gray and DLS. So please take a look at those. There are 2 that I wanted to focus on, and then I will turn things over to our Assistant Secretary for Administration, Heather Barthel, who is to my right. The first is, well, in advance of the first, I'll say that it is true that MDA sustained some serious cuts in this budget, and many of those were to our pass-through funding, which went to organizations like Rural Maryland Council, Marbitco, and also SMATIC, Southern Maryland Ag Development Commission. So I'm sure you'll hear from folks about that, and I know Rural Maryland Council is here to discuss that. I did want to point out 2 things. Personnel and address 2 things, personnel and vacancies and also the LEAF program. As Mr. Gray did note, Since December, our vacancy rate has been pulled down significantly. At the end of this month, we will be at, we're estimating 4.68% vacancy rate. So just due to turnover and a hiring spree to fill vacant positions, and there were a number of positions, new positions that were created and some contractual conversions. So we're very excited to get that number down to 4.68%. The 4 positions that Mr. Gray noted, the 6 positions that Mr. Gray noted as a recommended cut, 4 are related to food processing residuals, which was a piece of legislation last year that had a lot of support to it, and that was to manage this application of what was commonly called sludge. It's food processing residuals. It's something that our farmers do make use of, but there was a problem with a couple of bad actors around the state that were making a bit too much use of those products. So we do need staff to manage this new program, and 4 of those positions are related to the inspections, the compliance, and processing of permits. 1 position is for our animal health. As Mr. Gray noted, we're in the midst of avian influenza outbreaks across the state, and we are in desperate need of not only veterinarians, trained DVMs, but also pathologists specifically to work in our labs so that as samples come in, we're able to quickly turn around those tests and get those out the door. And then the final position is to be created along with the LEAF program to manage that program. And we're looking at the LEAF program, which I'll talk about a little more in depth momentarily, as our way forward in thinking about conservation and thinking about community engagement, farmer engagement with all of our regulations and our practices, and certainly when we're talking about the bay and air and soil health and water quality. Moving on to LEAF, this is our Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming program, and as Mr. Gray noted, it was very much based on a concept that was developed last year, the Best in Show concept, which was a bill that incentivized the stacking of practices. So right now, if you look at our programs, we've got many different programs across our agency, as do other agencies related to the Bay specifically. And whether it's planting trees or it's cover crops or it's soil health grants, we've got a lot of different programs. And a farmer can come in and take advantage of one of those programs and go home and never hear from us, and we'll never hear from them again. What LEAF does is it creates an incentive program through which a farmer will be rewarded for stacking practices. So as they do more to do better by the Bay, they're going to get more recognition. They're going to get potentially higher reimbursements where applicable. And then we're also creating through the LEAF program, in addition to conservation best practices, we're creating community best practices. And the goal with that is to expand farmer awareness and farmer engagement in all of our other programs. For example, we've got a program that encourages farmers to get certified with us to then sell to state agencies and institutions. And on the other side of that, there's a rule that is requiring agencies to buy 20% local products or explain why they're unable to. Well, LEAF will help us connect those dots. It will help farmers sell more eggs to corrections. It will help farmers sell more meat to the University of Maryland. So it really is going to be a comprehensive program for all of our initiatives going forward. LEAF is the result of the CSER report, which came out through the Bay program, and one of the hallmarks of CSER was advice for states to start thinking differently, that what we're doing is working. It's a slow roll, but it's working. We need to speed things up and try different things. And through LEAF, we're going to be able to really dive in and push forward faster on conservation. So we're very excited about that. And with that, I will turn it over to Heather, unless there are questions. Thank you.
So the one item that I'm going to address is our information technology projects that Andrew noted, and this is a good example of why his analysis is so important, is because we did not even realize until last week that the cost associated with MITDP1, the first project, was showing us having this ballooned amount of money for prior years. And what it turned out it was that when DoIT performed the work of standing up One Stop, that they had to do an accounting correction and attribute it to somewhere. So they divided up the cost of that project among the agencies that were using One Stop. And so it was work that DoIT performed from 2018 to 2024. So our MITDP project did not increase, but what it was an accounting correction on their part for the work that they did for One Stop.
That's it.
Yep,
Doc,
that's it.
appreciate it. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Did you mention that in your report, the accounting correction from DoIT?
We did not mention that explicitly in the report.
But-
It was
but you're-
something that we're now aware of. It's sort of unusual to kind of backdate
Right.
funding like that. And it certainly obviously distorts the funding for the program, which is unfortunate.
Okay. I just want to clarify that. So we have some members who have questions. Who would like to go first? Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. A couple of technical questions that I hope will be able to elicit some quick answers. First, on the federal reimbursement request for the avian influenza expenses, I noted in your written response you talked about USDA issuing a pre-award on February 6th, just a little while ago, and that the emergency cooperative agreement has already been submitted to USDA for its review. Could you tell us just very quickly the procedural sort of posture, how that works? What does a pre-award mean in terms of guaranteed funding for this important subject matter?
I will defer to Heather, who is handling that directly.
So there's two parts to the process, is that first you submit your pre-award request to USDA and you use your best judgment as to the work that you're performing and what it's going to cost. And there's two parts to it, is that there are certain costs that USDA will reimburse us for, such as PPE, and then there are other costs that the state will have to cover, such as, the employees can't leave the site, so we have to provide them with food and water and items like that. So you submit your pre-award request first, and what that does is that preserves the funding for the work that you're already completing before the emergency cooperative agreement is approved. So since we submitted our response, our emergency cooperative agreement has now been approved.
Great. Well, that's good news.
Right.
My next question is about the estimates for implementing the electric vehicle supply equipment management process. And I understand the distinction made between accuracy and reliability as two different functions. But looking at Exhibit 5 on the analyst report on page 20, there's a notable difference in the estimated cost for agencies offering to handle the reliability aspect of that program. And MDA's estimate is significantly higher than some of the other agency estimates. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts as to why that may be the case.
Is Rachel here?
We could rely on another expert here.
Good afternoon, Rachel Jones, Director of Government Relations. That is because there was a work group over the interim that was supposed to determine which agency would be best for that. And the product of that work group was that it was discussed that it would be left to the legislature to determine which agency would be best to regulate reliability and uptime. And so MDA was prepared to continue doing consumer protection, which is what our Weights and Measures Division already has the authority to do. We just don't have the equipment. And so not only does the fiscal note for that particular bill, SB 913, include funding for MDA to purchase equipment, vehicles, inspectors, but we would also need additional pins for staff to essentially stand up an entirely new program and then hire appropriate staff to be able to determine reliability and uptime. That's not something that MDA staff or Weights and Measures staff currently do. That is something that has traditionally been left to the PSC. And so for that reason, the fiscal note is higher because we have no expertise within the agency at this time on those matters.
And then finally, Madam Chair, one last quick question, if I may. On the compliance and enforcement inspections reporting requirement, your written response noted that MDE is the lead agency in responding, working together with MDA, and that MDE, it's your understanding, will be submitting that report in the near future. I'm just wondering if there's any update on what in the near future might mean.
To our knowledge, MDE, I believe, may have submitted that report last week.
Okay, we'll double check that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Mangiani?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary, and good luck with the challenge of the bird flu. I know when Chicken Day was here in Annapolis recently, and a number of the farmers obviously said that that was a huge challenge, so good luck dealing with that.
Thank you.
As you know, Mr. Secretary, one of the burning issues that is facing Maryland farmers in North Baltimore County, where I represent, is, of course, the threat from what I would say is this unneeded project with the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project. And as you know, this is going to disrupt a lot of farming operations, probably deprive Maryland from what I would say is some of the most valuable farmland. And I have a couple questions in regard to that project. Number one, has the Department of Agriculture, will they take a position on this Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project?
Thank you for the question. And as a Baltimore County resident, it's concerning. And we've expressed that all along and have been speaking with farmers, landowners. I've been out to see one site, for example, in northern Baltimore County. A young couple purchased the farm. One of the reasons they were able to get it for a deal was there were 2 separate power lines running through it, and they are slated to have a third power line running through it. So it's concerning, certainly. I know that we've been having discussions with internally. There is a process that we're going through, and maybe Rachel, you can discuss how we provide comment and how we submit our statements on it.
Certainly. So as an agency that is a part of the Moore administration, we do submit any and all feedback that we may receive about the Piedmont Reliability Project or any project. That includes various solar development projects as well that we get feedback from the agriculture community on. And so we do submit that feedback to the administration. We also coordinate with the Department of Natural Resources PPRP program because, of course, they're the ones that review the applications for the CPCN process, the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, before those projects are then passed on to the PSC for approval. And so we do communicate with them regularly and share that information with them as is part of sort of our procedure as an agency. We defer to the agencies that do have the authority over those projects, but we do give feedback based on what we hear from the agricultural community on a regular basis.
And thank you for explaining how that works. And we had the PSC in here the other day. And what I gather from your answer is we're waiting on some type of comment or statement from the governor then. The Department of Agriculture has not taken a stance, yes or no, for that project then. Is a fair statement?
It has not taken a position, and our position will be that of the administration.
Okay, great. And then thank you for that. And I guess my other question would be, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but has the Department of Agriculture specifically conducted any studies on the impact of the project on farms and how much farming income could be lost if this project is authorized by the Public Service Commission?
And thank you for that question. We have not conducted a study. We have requested through our Land Preservation Foundation, which does hold a number of easements in northern Baltimore County, to come back to us with an assessment of how many properties. We have seen analyses that third parties have put together. A couple of groups that have coalesced around this issue have provided, I guess we'd call them economic impact studies, so we've analyzed those.
Okay, great. Then, well, thank you. My third question you kind of already answered, so I appreciate you being here and your answers.
Yep, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Delegate Metzger.
My delegate, he had his light on before mine. Okay.
He's contemplating.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. Appreciate all your input. Question I have is, I don't own an electric vehicle, but when I go to these charging stations, have we figured out how much does it average cost to recharge or refuel one of these electric vehicles? And who pays for that?
Well, I can tell you my personal experience, which is why I'm personally very interested in our department and collaborations with other departments getting moving on this. As a driver of an EV, now it's a state EV, I can tell you that about half the time, the charger I end up at is not operational. About half the time. So I can't tell you what that costs, but it's certainly a loss to the state in terms of revenue by having those chargers down. Rachel, I don't know about the other parts.
Sure. So typically, the owner-operator of the EV charging station has the ability to set the rates. However, I know that that's something that's being discussed in the conversation around SB 913. I think the cross-file is House Bill 1039, I believe. But that's part of the conversation about that is ensuring that the rates can be set at a feasible amount. So I don't think that there's a mention of a cap on the rates, but there was conversation around whether or not the comptroller should set the rate so that it wouldn't be, too exorbitant, the same way we have with gas prices, where you can't just have prices that are absolutely out of control in one place and then $2 cheaper somewhere else. So there is discussion around ensuring that the rates would be controlled. But currently, those rates are set by the owner-operator of the electric vehicle charging station.
I asked that question about the electric charging stations for a reason. I was with a friend of mine who has an EV, and we went to a charging station to charge up, and just like you said, it was unoperational. So we went to another one. It was unoperational. So I think it's going to, if we don't get this fixed, it's really going to cause havoc.
And that's one of the reasons that we're excited to jump in as soon as possible, because we're hearing about that and experiencing it ourselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Let me just follow up on that real quick, and then we're going to go to Delegate Eelson. So what's preventing you from jumping in, or what is the vehicle that will allow you to jump in?
Sure. So at present, our Weights and Measures Division, following NIST standards, that's the National Institute for Standards and Technology, under those provisions which are codified in Maryland law, we already have the authority to begin inspecting commercial EV chargers throughout the state of Maryland. However, our Weights and Measures unit has not had the funding to purchase the equipment. The equipment altogether, in order to be able to test those EV charging stations, is a little over $600,000. And so while we could do it with the equipment separate from the legislation that I've mentioned, that legislation is going to also give us the authority to, again, have reporting requirements to the legislature on how that process is working, reliability, uptime, consumer protection standards, a whole myriad of things that we'd be doing in addition.
So we'll keep an eye on that legislation.
Yes. Okay.
That's what I was just trying to figure out. And then I really thought we had funded the $600,000 last year. The $650,000 didn't make it into the final.
No. Okay. In the House, it passed. It did not pass in the Senate.
I see. We did the right thing.
Yes.
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 Now that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And to wrap us up, it will be Delegate Edelson with his questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Secretary, and everyone who's with you, and for all your hard work on behalf of our constituents and all Marylanders. If memory serves me correctly, I think this is the first time you've been before us not in a green tie. So I don't know if that's like the dry cleaner is closed for President's Day, or we're just like down to business now, and that's where we're at. But I wanted to ask you about value-added agriculture. This is something, as you know, the legislature has been looking into for a number of years now. How do we do better with it? You provided the report. We have your report and the follow-up testimony, and we appreciate that. The question I have for you really is more of a structural one, which is, in order for us to really take the next steps, this is going to take a lot of economic development, commercial analysis in terms of, how do we get more younger farmers and better infrastructure and technology and, all these things that are needed for us to really expand the commercial options that I think we have a high potential for in the state.
Yes.
The Department of Ag really at its core is a regulatory agency. So I guess the question I have is, are we giving you an unfair sort of task to say, hey, power us into the next generation of value-added agriculture when that's not really what you're set up to do? And if the answer to that is yes, do you have any suggestions on how we can help you do that?
I very much appreciate that question, and certainly the note about the green tie. So I've written that down. The issue with value-added agriculture is it's complicated. So if all I want to do is farm, as long as zoning allows it and as long as I buy the equipment and the soil has to be good, helps to have some water on site, I'm good. But if you want to start a creamery and you want to make a food, well, now the health department's involved and you're building a facility that now the Department of Environment is involved, and you're probably seeking grants, and so Commerce is involved and USDA is involved. So that's just for a creamery. If you want to do a farm brewery, whole different construct, same basic idea of needing lots of permits and taking lots of time. So we find ourselves, unlike those other agencies who, when it comes to value-added agriculture, are on the regulatory side of it, we're on the cheerleader side of it. We're on the side of we need to provide options so that our industry has the path forward if they want to diversify, and many of them do. That's why we have a value-added agriculture specialist. That's why we have programs specifically devoted to it. So the win here is our specialist is spending a lot of time working with the other agencies to overcome specific hurdles, and then building navigation tools so the next person who wants to open an ice cream facility on a farm, there's a path, and that it's not something new. Now, of course, every county, the road is slightly different to getting your operation open, but we have begun discussing the concept of matching what a number of states has, which is an economic development body within our office. And so we've been looking into that. There's a distinct need for it. In the meantime, I will point to the governor has announced a few really, really positive efforts which are affecting value-added agriculture directly. There's a new commission that will be based at the Department of Planning, specifically about regulations and permits and cutting them, streamlining them, figuring out how to get from A to B faster. And then in the Department of Commerce, under the new secretary, there is an office that is essentially a how do we get you open as fast as possible department. And so we're very excited to be working with them as well. And we've got staff on each of those bodies.
Got it. Well, we look forward to hearing those developments.
Thank you.
So it's a help desk for getting open fast.
100%.
Great. I overlooked Delegate Solomon. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question for her, and it's nice to see your team, you and your team, and I can follow up on a couple of other specific issues, but obviously the avian flu is pretty
Yes.
significant or dire in the situation as we see, and some of the reports coming out of Washington are not particularly favorable in terms of staff layoffs, in terms of or firings, in terms of USDA. Can you comment at all as to whether or not you all have seen any impact in the last month or so, or you anticipate an impact of firings in DC impacting how we're able to handle the situation in Maryland?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. It is a serious situation, and it's one that we are in control of. That said, new situations are arising, and so our entire goal, our entire apparatus is to make sure we gain operational control as soon as possible. That's how you keep the virus from spreading from one farm to the next. In terms of federal supports, as you heard from Heather, USDA has been a good partner and has been responsive. As we know, there was a period of time where there was a pause on any contracts and money going out. Then that was released, and it took a little bit of time just to get back moving again, but we feel like we're in good stead. We did learn today of a number of layoffs at the National Laboratory, which is the one that confirms all of our infections. So we test it, and we call it a non-negative or a presumptive positive. When we get numbers like that fall into that category, we begin acting on the farm. We get on the farm and begin the process. But we still have to send those tests to the National Veterinary Lab and wait for results. All of the folks who were on probation at the National Laboratory have been let go. And so I don't know that we've sent tests within the last day or so, but we'll let you know as soon as we see if there's a lag time.
Okay, and then that would, not getting those test results back from the National Laboratory, would that influence your next steps as a state agency? It's
really the required third-party confirmation. And so I've been asking our team, or is there another way to get a third-party confirmation if we were need to for indemnity reasons or whatever it might be? And the answer right now is no. That's the lab.
And that lab indemnity, that would obviously be to cover the cost of the farmer.
Correct.
So
the farmer and the integrator.
Yeah. Yes. So potentially we're in a situation where you're going to act to preserve public health and the health of the agricultural system, which is critically important, but we could be hanging essentially our farmers out to dry because of problems that, we globally with the federal changes.
I would say my understanding right now is that the way we operate, if we have a non-negative, a presumptive positive, that qualifies, that enables us to act, right. And that qualifies the farmer and the integrator, Purdue or Mount Air, for reimbursement and coverage of their costs. So it's not tied to that confirmation, although we need that confirmation. I mean, that helps to confirm that our lab is operating as it needs to be. We are certified, as a national laboratory, and we have 4 in the region, 4 labs within the region. So we're really hoping that there's no impact from it, but it's a wait and see.
Okay, right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That is all we have time for today. We may follow up with some written questions.
Please.
Okay, great. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
We now have a couple of people that are going to testify, and on my list, we have Charlotte Davis from the Rural Maryland Council, Steve McHenry from Morbid Co. We have Susan O'Neill from the Upper Shore Regional Council. All of you may come forward. Whoever gets there first can begin speaking. And we also have Peter Caracco from Historic St. Mary's, although I'm not sure this is the hearing that he wants, but it might be. So if he's here, he can come forward. So we have 2 of 4 people. Anyone else here that signed up to testify? Okay, why don't we start with your name, introduce yourself, and you may proceed.
So, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Charlotte Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council, here in support of the Governor's appropriation for the Rural Maryland Council. I also want to acknowledge that my board chair is here, Susan O'Neill, with the Upper Shore Regional Council, and chair of our Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund Committee, Scott Warner, in the back. And so, as you know, we administer the Maryland Agriculture Education and Rural Development Assistance Fund, as well as the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. The intent is to help grow local economies to support our rural communities. Our programs are oversubscribed. Each year we get over 200 applications requesting almost $20 million. Last year we were able to award about a little over $6 million. We think we've got an impact on our programs. For 4 years, we reported $137 million in economic impact for the state's investment, creating 1,100 jobs and creating $45 million in employee compensation. Our funds have been cut 33%, so we ask that you please not cut us any further. We understand it's a difficult year. However, we would love to get back our $9 million, but we understand you've got some difficult decisions to make. Finally, that reduction is going to impact our ability to help support small business development, infrastructure, health services, as well as regional economic development and planning. So with that, I would like to appreciate your time and thank you for your support.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Susan O'Neill. I am the chair of the Rural Maryland Council, as Charlotte introduced me, and the executive director of the Upper Shore Regional Council. And I'm honored to speak with you today about the critical role that rural Maryland plays in our state economy. The governor's appropriation for the Rural Maryland Council and the Maryland Agricultural Education Rural Development Assistance Fund, lovingly known as MARDAF, in the budget bill is an essential source of support for our communities, and without the support, children, families, business owners, and aging residents in our rural communities will be left behind. We are grateful for the governor's continued commitment to our rural communities and for his support in recognizing their contributions. Agriculture products generate approximately $3.3 billion annually to our state economy. Agritourism in Maryland generates $160 million in economic impact each year and supports thousands of jobs. To keep our rural communities vibrant, we need sustained investments in economic and community development. The funding provided in fiscal year 2026 will support the operations of the Rural Maryland Council, enhance our programs, and elevate the important work of the 5 regional councils: the Upper Shore Regional Council, the Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland, the Tri-County Council for Western Maryland, the Tri-County Council for Lower Eastern Shore of Maryland, and the Mid-Shore Regional Council. These regional councils represent 15 of the 24 jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. As regional councils, we drive positive change at the local level in many powerful ways. We convene stakeholders from government, business, and education across our regions to find solutions to real-time issues impacting our communities while involving residents to ensure solutions align with community needs. We serve as regional planning and development agency, fostering physical and economic and social development. We champion the initiatives that promote business growth, workforce development through entrepreneurship programs, and infrastructure improvement through capital investments. We help bridge the gaps, funding gaps, and help small businesses make their mark on existing and emerging industries like agriculture, transportation, manufacturing, and hospitality. It's a grassroots approach to economic development. So the RIMPIF and MARDAF are essential tools in supporting these regional efforts. RIMPIF being the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund. These programs fuel opportunity creation and collaboration in our communities. By supporting the House Bill 350, we are ensuring that resources needed to drive local economic development, create jobs, and improve lives of our people in our rural communities are available. The 5 regional councils are at the forefront of this effort, and the governor's support will empower them to continue these efforts. Thank you for your time and consideration.
And thank you for being here to testify. Unless the other 2 people have come in, that would be Steve McHenry or Peter Caraccio, we are going to close this hearing for the department. Oh, would we have someone?
Madam Chairman, Steve Conley with Maryland Department of Agriculture. Steve McHenry's under the weather. He submitted written testimony and
Great.
Wanted to say sorry it's not here.
Hope he feels better. Send him our good wishes. All right, then. That is it for the Department of Agriculture.
Thank you.
And now we will move on to the Maryland Transit Administration. And if you will come up, Ms. Arnold, the administrator, and the secretary, and we're going to go ahead with Samuel Quist from the Department of Legislative Services. You may begin.
And good afternoon. This is the DLS analysis for the Maryland Transit Administration. The fiscal 26 budget increases by $71 million to $1.3 billion. The chart on page 1 reflects that there is a proposed fiscal 2025 deficiency appropriation of $58.5 million shown here. This represents a settlement payment that was approved by the Board of Public Works in November to settle litigation related to the State Center redevelopment project. Absent that deficiency, the allowance would grow by $129.5 million. There have also been 2 fiscal 2025 budget amendments processed to date that are not reflected on this chart, totaling $46.6 million, which would also impact the year-over-year change. On page 2 for the capital budget summary, the capital budget grows by $59.5 million to $753.8 million. I'm going to turn ahead to page 7 of the report. This is the performance analysis section. Exhibit 1 is showing monthly ridership data for MTA. You can see here that since the pandemic, ridership for MTA has gradually continued to increase, and in fiscal 24, the data showed about an 11% increase in ridership over the previous year. However, compared to fiscal 2019, ridership before the pandemic began, fiscal 24 was approximately only about 68% of pre-pandemic total ridership. Exhibit 2 on page 8 is showing on-time performance data for MTA by transit mode. You can see here that the highest on-time performance was mobility transit at about 94%, and the lowest was bus transit at 73%, with the others being in the middle there. Fare box recovery data for MTA modes is shown on page 9. This is the percent of operating costs recovered through passenger fares, and the fare box recovery ratio has generally been lower since fiscal 21 as a result of reduced ridership changes caused by the pandemic, combined with operating cost increases. Fare box recovery ratios ranged from 12% for MARC train to 2% for MTA Metro. Performance measures reported to the MTA for core bus, light rail, and metro are shown on pages 10 through 12. And on page 12, there is a comparison of performance measures for MTA bus service with bus services in other cities. You can see here that MTA bus service compared favorably in the areas of operating expense per passenger trip and passenger trips per vehicle mile compared to the other cities that were analyzed here. On page 14 is a summary of the fiscal 2026 allowance. The pie chart here shows that a little over half of the budget goes towards bus operations. A little over a quarter of the budget goes towards rail operations. The remainder of the budget supports the statewide program as well as MTA administrative costs. And Exhibit 7 on pages 15 and 16 is showing the changes in the proposed budget. Of the $71 million overall increase, $37.1 million is increases for personnel expenses. These include both increases related to salary increases as well as new positions. In the operating budget, there are 167 total new positions which are added in the areas of both transit reliability and MTA police. And the personnel section of the analysis covers that in a little bit more detail. Non-personnel operating expense growth, when you take out the proposed deficiency I mentioned earlier, grows by about $92.3 million. The largest share of that, about $83.5 million, is for the 3 transit service contracts for paratransit, commuter bus service, and MARC train. These account for inflation and other contractual rate increases, and particularly in the area of paratransit, reflecting increased ridership growth in that area. On the bottom of page 16, there is a summary of 2 provisions in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, which impact MTA expenditures and revenues in future fiscal years. The first of these delays the requirement that MTA procure only zero-emission buses for its fleet beginning in fiscal 2027 to instead begin in fiscal 2032. The second BRFA provision would expand the allowable uses set in statute for the Grant Anticipation Revenue Vehicle, or GARVI bond funding, to also include supporting rehabilitation of the MTA light rail system in Baltimore. And there's a program included in the CTP this year for that light rail modernization, which the funding plan includes this use of GARVI bond funding. On the top of page 17, there's a mention of a new mandated appropriation that went into effect in fiscal 2026 for the locally operated transit system program. This requires at least an $80.5 million annual appropriation beginning in fiscal 2026. However, in recent fiscal years and in fiscal 2026, the program funding has exceeded that level. So in effect, that this would basically set a floor in future years to prevent reductions in future years. The analysis also notes that MTA and MDOT implemented a revised LOTS program funding formula for fiscal 25 grants. The analysis is asking if MTA could provide a little bit more details on some of those changes that were implemented as part of that revised formula. The personnel data on page 17 and 18 includes more detailed breakdown of the new positions in the fiscal 26 budget. So in total, across operating and capital, there are 171 new positions. The operating share of those is the 167 I mentioned previously. Those include 92 positions related to transit reliability and delivery, which are the second installment of 200 total new positions over last year and this year's budget related to that initiative. And then the other positions, the majority of those, about 78, are MTA police positions, which are created related to recruiting for the eventual staffing of the Purple Line once that opens. Discussion of the MTA capital budget begins on page 18. And on page 19, there is a list of federal discretionary grants that have been awarded to MTA and also which MTA has applied for. In total, between federal fiscal 21 and 24, MTA has been awarded over $7.2 billion in discretionary federal funding. The largest amount of this come from two projects: the Frederick Douglass Tunnel Project and the Susquehanna River Bridge Replacement Program. And there are also $29.8 million in funding that MTA has applied for that are currently pending. On page 20, Exhibit 9 is showing a breakdown of capital funding program for MTA in the CTP over the 6-year period. In total, there's about $5.7 billion in capital funding across the 6 years. And this graph is showing that the majority of that, about 57% of the 6-year total, is going towards system preservation, including in fiscal 26, there's about $420 million programmed for system preservation. Exhibit 10 on page 21 and 22 is showing a breakdown of the fiscal 26 capital budget by individual projects. You can see here the top line of this chart, the two largest areas of capital funding are going towards the Purple Line and the Red Line projects for development and evaluation. And then on page 23, this begins a discussion of analysis of the capital cash flow changes. Exhibit 11 is showing basically a breakdown of the funding for fiscal 2025 as introduced last year, the current 25 working appropriation, and then the 2026 budget as introduced this year. So there was about $122.7 million increase in fiscal 25 between last year's allowance and the working appropriation. And then the fiscal 2026 allowance is a roughly similar level to the fiscal 25 working appropriation. And then the next two charts are basically showing a detailed breakdown of this by project. So on page 24 and 25, this is showing the changes by project for the fiscal 25 budget as introduced to the 25 working appropriation. And then page 26 and page 27 is similarly showing a breakdown between the fiscal 25 working appropriation and the fiscal 26 allowance. The next couple of charts are showing a breakdown of projects receiving first-year construction and design funding in fiscal 25 and 26. The CTP based on requirements and statute, includes breakouts of these. So Exhibit 14 is basically showing a comparison of the amount of funding in the budget that's first-year funding versus ongoing. So it's about 16% of capital funding that is first-year funding. And then on pages 29 and pages 29 and page 30 is the breakdown by project of that. The chart on page 31 is showing two changes in the CTP from last year. There were two projects that were moved from the development and evaluation program to the construction program, the light rail modernization program and the Susquehanna River Bridge replacement project. And then on page 32, this begins the issues section of the analysis. So the main item here is discussing updates for the Purple Line project and the Red Line project. Under the Purple Line project, if you recall last March when we were in session, there was discussion of a modification to the P3 agreement for the Purple Line, which increased the total amount for that agreement, as well as extending the revenue service date to winter of 2027. Since last March, there have not been any significant changes in addition to those changes. And as of November 30th, according to the bi-monthly status updates that MTA submits to the budget committees, the project was about 74% complete, and the construction is ongoing. The Department of Legislative Services is continuing to recommend that MTA submit those status updates to keep the committees updated on the status of the Purple Line. Then pages 30 and 34 discuss some of the milestones in the Red Line project. As you know, last summer, the governor announced that the project would use light rail as its service mode. And then on the bottom of page 33 and 34, there's discussion of the three main alternatives that MTA has developed for the project's route through Baltimore, which are continuing to be ongoing. The analysis is asking MTA to comment a little bit more on if they can provide more details on what the timeline is for revising that route, as well as what is going on with the current federal NEPA process and what the timeline for completing that is. The other item in the issues section is discussing, there were a couple of recent pieces of legislation that made updates to requirements for what MTA is required to provide when it proposes service changes. There was budget bill language in last year's budget that restricted funding in both MTA and the Secretary's office until there was a report submitted on two specific bus routes and proposed changes in Baltimore City. That report was submitted by MTA in December, and DLS reviewed it and found that it contained all of the items that were requested in the language. So DLS is therefore recommending that those funds that were restricted in last year's budget be released. And if there are no objections raised by committee members during the hearing, DLS will proceed with preparing a letter to that effect to release those funds. The DLS recommended actions are shown on page 37. The first recommended action, as I mentioned earlier, requesting additional committee narrative for bi-monthly status updates on the Purple Line. On the capital budget, DLS is recommending to concur with the governor's allowance. And then lastly, I would just point out for reference, there's several updates on a few other items for reference, including an update on the pre-solicitation for a P3 agreement for the Eastern Shore freight rail lines, which DLS reviewed last fall. An update on paratransit service metrics that were discussed in last year's analysis, as well as a summary of two reports that MTA is required to update by statute, the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan and the MTA Capital Needs Assessment Inventory. That will conclude the DLS presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview. And we will move on to the Secretary of Transportation, Paul Wiedefeld, and Holly Arnold, who is the administrator for MTA.
Good afternoon, Chair Watson, members of the committee. For the record, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation, joined today with Holly Arnold, the Administrator of the MTA. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And Sam, thank you for a thorough analysis as well. As the committee knows, transit is a critical public service for riders across Maryland, and it is essential to the economic success of the state. Every day, hundreds of thousands of Marylanders rely on MTA to access jobs, education, and a full array of life's opportunities and needs. And over the past year, MTA has had many accomplishments, and I'd like to highlight just a few to give a sense of the range of activities underway at the MTA. For example, the MTA's MARC service, in collaboration with VRE, Virginia Rail Express Service, entered into a new agreement that cross-honors tickets between the two services. This allows MARC riders to access points south of D.C. at no additional cost and expands our regional connectivity, including for Virginians that may want to use BWI Airport. In Baltimore, the agency helped grow the region's workforce when it launched a paid bus mechanic apprenticeship program and accepted the first 10 candidates. This effort will help grow MTA's skilled workforce and create more well-paid jobs in the region. And of course, MTA is also focused on growing transit service and access by focusing on several major projects. One being the Purple Line, which is now 75% complete and received its first 7 light rail vehicles last year. And earlier this month, we launched a grant program for small businesses impacted by the construction of the Purple Line. We're also continuing to advance the Baltimore's Red Line. These 2 major projects are part of many efforts designed to transform transit in Maryland. This is just a small sample of all that MTA has been working on in the past year, and with your support of the Governor's Transportation Revenue Package, there's much more to come. On a particular note, the revenue package allows us to match available federal funding and fully fund the Central Light Rail Modernization Program. This $1.2 billion program will allow us to deliver the much-needed improvements to ensure the reliability of the system. Now I will turn the presentation over to Administrator Arnold.
Thank you, Secretary. Good afternoon, Chair Watson, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Holly Arnold, Administrator for the Maryland Transit Administration. I'd like to also thank Sam for his detailed review and analysis. It was great working with you, very helpful and professional. So as the committee knows, MTA has always been an economic engine within Maryland. In fact, 9 out of 10 trips we provide are for riders going to spend money or make money. Additionally, when you look at our service region's 1.2 million jobs, about half are available by train or bus, and the work that we do benefits employers statewide, with MTA supporting around 10,000 jobs on an annual basis. For a long time, our funding was not prioritized in a way that reflected the important role that we fill. However, I'm pleased to say that that has changed. Under the administration's proposed budget, we're poised to get MTA back on track and deliver the transit system that our state deserves. Ultimately, this means that we can maintain what was built, invest wisely, and better serve our riders. To that point, the proposed budget will help our efforts to tackle critical state of good repair projects, like updating our MARC maintenance and storage facilities, overhauling and replacing our fleet of rail vehicles, and maintaining the annual replacements of our buses to keep our systems reliable. This funding will also support major capital investments, such as the replacement of our full metro fleet and a new communications-based train control system, which is scheduled to start rolling out later this year. It includes our light rail modernization program, which will replace our existing fleet with modern, low-floor, accessible vehicles, improvements to the stations and maintenance facilities, and replacement of the outdated signaling system, and includes $213 million in federal funds. And it ensures that we continue to meet our contribution to the Frederick Douglass Tunnel project, which will increase capacity and speed along the Northeast Corridor, which means better and more reliable MARC service. In Montgomery and Prince George's County, we'll continue construction on the Purple Line, which now sits at over 75% complete, with revenue service scheduled to begin in winter 2027. And at the same time, we'll be focused on advancing the Red Line, a much-needed transit line in Baltimore City that will create a more connected system. And we anticipate an alignment announcement this year. We have a lot of exciting stuff planned, and I can guarantee that MTA knows how to deliver. Over the past year, we've seen ridership grow 15%. We provided over 68 million rides in 2024 and reached post-pandemic highs on all of our modes. We reduced our agency's hiring time by 40% and hired more than 400 operators for the second consecutive year. And I can tell you that when you ride our system, you can feel a difference. We've reduced our core bus cut service from 12% down to 2%, and our mobility on-time performance is now greater than 93%. We've also invested significant time in developing our internal and prospective workforce through key agency initiatives. As the Secretary mentioned, in August of 2024, in collaboration with Baltimore City Community College, we launched our first paid apprenticeship program, where the 10 selected candidates are already learning the ins and outs of bus maintenance. We established MTA's Youth Transit Council, which is comprised of students in the region and designed to elevate the transit needs of students throughout the entire state. And we graduated our second Emerging Leaders class, a program where up-and-coming leaders throughout the MTA come together to grow their skills and tackle agency challenges. It's been a busy year of hard work and progress, but there's so much more to do. Transit remains critical to the long-term success of our state. And I'd like to thank the efforts of the Moore-Miller administration, and because of that, transit has a very bright future in the state. So with that said, I want to thank the entire MTA team for their outstanding work. So turning to the DLS analysis, on the first issue, we were asked to comment on the new formula for the locally operated transit systems, or the LOTS. So MTA has been working on an update to this formula for several years. One of the questions is, how does it change from the prior formula? And just to be clear, there was no prior formula. We simply gave the same amount of funding that they got the year before. It doesn't matter if their service had grown. It didn't matter if their service had decreased. The funding was the same. We realized we needed to change that, and so we've been working for the past few years on an actual formula. We looked at the federal government to match the intent of the federal funds, since many of our funds are pass-through. And so the goal of federal funds is basically to help jurisdictions recoup some of the costs of the public transportation that they provide. It doesn't try to kind of predict and provide for latent demand, but basically, what you provide, helping to recoup for that. So the factors that go into our formula is basically, 30% is boardings, how much ridership you have, 30% is revenue vehicle miles, 30% revenue vehicle hours, and then 10% is population living within poverty, and some of the factors that are used from the Federal Transit Administration. We did work extensively with the LOTS agencies over the past few years to establish the formula. We put it out for review and comment. We made some adjustments based on those comments, and it did take effect in fiscal year 2025. I'd also like to note that we do have a 3-year grace period in which no jurisdictions will experience a decrease in operating funds, and we're going to continue to work closely with our LOTS as this rolls out. On the second issue, we were asked to comment on the timeline for the red line alignment and NEPA completion. We currently anticipate announcing the alignment this year and the completion of the federal NEPA process in fall of 2026. So with that said, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony, and we have several questions for you today. I'm going to let each delegate ask 3 questions and then move to someone else. So we will start with Delegate Edelson, and then we'll go to Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to pack it all into 3 questions. Great to see you. Oh, great. Thank you. Great to see you, Madam Administrator and Mr. Secretary. And I just want to say, at the CTP tour for Baltimore, there were a multitude of state and local elected officials really speaking in a unified voice, saying we need more investment in the Baltimore system. And you all clearly listened, and the budget as proposed is a reflection of that. And so I just want to say thank you for listening and really making that investment, which is not easy at these times. And so I'm extremely appreciative of that. And frankly, I think it's a testament to why there's so many people in the room today who are clearly all here to testify favorably for the proposed budget, both as a recognition of the improvements and as a recognition of how important this is to the region and to the state. With that, I have some questions for you, because I think really the thing that we have to do now, all of us collectively, is deliver results for the people of Maryland and the folks who ride the service, and hopefully, more importantly, the folks that don't ride it now but will in the future. So just starting with the ridership numbers, I know that clearly there have been increases, as you mentioned. We've hit some post-pandemic highs. But the reality is that we're still approximately 30 million boardings short of where we were in 2019 across the system, and so annually. And so what I'd like to understand from you is sort of, one, what are we doing to get those 30 million boardings back? And two, is there something in the data that we should be looking at as a reflection of a new reality, right? So for example, commuter bus is nowhere near where it was pre-pandemic, and really that hasn't changed. So on that, it's improved, but not to a significant level. The question that I have for you there really is, where are the majority of those routes starting and ending? Are they routes that are going to DC that we could expect to increase significantly as a result of changes made by the federal government? Or are many of them routes coming to Baltimore City, and some of those employees are now working remotely or working 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week? Is there something that we can glean from these numbers that would help us to make improvements going forward?
Okay, I can start. The main thing that we hear that riders want, fast, frequent, and reliable service. So that is ultimately what we're trying to provide and striving to provide. You'll hear me talk about reliability, I think, first and foremost, because that is key, ensuring that your bus or train is going to show up when it says it's going to. This budget in particular, I think, does a lot to kind of get us back on track for that. I will fully acknowledge on the rail side in particular that we are having struggles right now, mostly due to the condition of the rail cars, light rail and metro both. On the metro side, the new rail cars coming into service later this year will make a huge difference and allow us to get back to those frequent headways that we need and our riders deserve. And I think that will make a difference there on bringing some folks back to metro. Along those lines, we do have an advertising campaign that we're going to be rolling out, letting people know the new rail cars are coming, want them to come check it out, reminding them of all the things that you can get to on the metro. We're going to have a billboard going up downtown later this month, even like reminding folks that, hey, at Shot Tower, there is a metro station there. Light rail as well. The secretary has wanted this for a long time, and I'm going to deliver. Light rail as well. Again, this program does fund the replacement of those vehicles. It will be a while, so we're continuing to look at what we can do to again increase the reliability of that service. Some of the additional pins that are being proposed in this budget are going to be for light rail mechanics, quality assurance and quality control, because the amount of corrective maintenance that we've seen from these rail cars is increasing, mostly just due to their age. So that will help as well. Some of the other things that we're doing, as the federal workforce is returning, we are advertising, we're letting folks know that we're still there. We do have the Charm Flex program that we rolled out a few years ago, where if you're only going in 3 days a week, you can get that, and it's a 15% discount over paying full fares, and kind of reminding folks that exists. We're going to be also rolling out a transit app kind of advertising campaign, reminding folks of how to use it. I think we assume a lot of times that people know how to use these materials, but we want to make sure that we're reminding them. And commuter bus as well, we did make adjustments this past summer to the level of service that we are providing. I will note that the ridership actually stayed steady even with a reduction in service. So I think it speaks to the work that our team did in coordination with our riders and the data to look at making sure that the service levels are aligned with the ridership needs. We are closely monitoring as the workforce returns. A lot of the buses from Southern Maryland into DC, especially this past week, we're not quite at capacity, but some fuller loads than we've seen, and we're going to continue to monitor that and look to make adjustments as we need to. But overall, we're continuing to look at adjusting our service to match the demands of ridership. One of the big things we've seen is ridership throughout the day and throughout the weekend. So as much as we can align that so it's not as heavily aligned with peaks, it allows riders to use it at the times that they need.
If I could just add, one thing that we're doing now, the Secretary's Office and obviously MTAs continue to do, is focusing on the land use side of the equation as well, particularly with transit-oriented development opportunities. We've done some things both on the MARC, we've done some efforts there, and we're looking obviously at metro and light rail there, because that's the long-term growth that we want to get back to. So that is another major part of the whole plan to get ridership back.
Okay. Appreciate that. On the reliability piece, that is obviously so critical. We have 200 pins, as I understand it, between the previous year's budget and the current budget year, specifically focused on reliability and delivery. When you look at a number of the 2024 on-time performance numbers across our services, many of them have moved in the wrong direction in 2024. Those 200 pins is a substantial investment, ideally largely in that. When do you think folks should expect to see that in the quality, the reliability of the service that they're getting?
So I want to note that most of the pins from last year's budget went towards operators, and our bus operators in particular, which has been our main focus. And so when you look at the service delivery, so that's basically the percent of scheduled service that we actually deliver, right, the inverse of cut service, it has increased quite a bit. So, we're now delivering 98% of the service that we say that we're going to, whereas this time in 2024, we were below 90%. So we've seen substantial increases there. I think one of the things that we see is, again, when we make those investments, when we focus on these things, we're able to see those achievements. And again, we've seen that on the bus side. The rail side, again, is a little bit more complicated because the vehicles are a huge piece of that. I think the additional railcar mechanics will help tremendously to allow us to address that corrective maintenance and get the vehicles out on the service that we need to on the light rail side in particular.
Great, thank you. Final quick question of this round is, I have a lot of constituents reaching out to me with excitement about the Be More Bus plan. Just want to get a sense of when we should expect that to be made public.
Yeah, we're really excited about the plan. I think, going back to fast, frequent, reliable service, that lays out our plan for how we're going to improve frequency, reliability, and have faster service going forward. So this spring, we should have the Be More Bus plan coming out, and we're going to be looking for our annual service changes to incorporate those plans into those changes.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate. And Delegate Solomon, 3 questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I may need another bite at the apple too, but I will try to combine. It's good to see you both. Thank you for everything you're doing. And Administrator Arnold, it was good to spend some time earlier this winter up at the light rail facility with you. Appreciated your team taking us around, and especially for those of us not from the Baltimore region who aren't sort of steeped in it on a regular basis. It was, I think, really, really helpful to be able to actually see what your incredible team is doing with spit, elbow grease, and duct tape to keep it going. So just want to say thank you for that. I'm going to sort of wrap the purple line question into one. So I know I mentioned to you before the hearing my concerns with the police request, just knowing how far out we still are, 2.5 years, give or take, from July 1 when this budget would go into effect, of winter of 27, and then potentially, obviously we know there still might be a delay. So I guess the combined question is, if we were to push off the police pins for another year, would still give you, give or take, about 1.5 years, and then just confirming that we're still on track. We were so happy to see the milestone of the trail opening a year earlier. Mm-hmm. So my one purple line question, pins for the police and making sure we're still on track with the Capitol Crescent Trail.
So I'll start with Capitol Crescent Trail, yes. And then to answer your other question that you didn't ask, yes, we are also still on track for end of winter 2027. That said, as the Secretary always reminds me, the systems piece is still ongoing, and we don't know what we don't know, but we are still working through that. So regarding Purple Line Police, so the whole process for hiring a police officer is pretty lengthy. So, say today I'm able to hire an officer. I need to get them in an academy somewhere. MTA has partnerships with Baltimore City, with the Transportation Authority. We have partnerships now with University of Maryland. So we do have partnerships throughout, but kind of depends on when those academies are starting. That's about 6 months. So then once they graduate from the academy, we like to do some on-the-job training with our officers, so shadowing our officers so they know how we do things, our policies, procedures, all of that, which is about another 6 months. So that's about a year process right there. That's also assuming that we're able to hire right away. It is hard to hire police officers right now. Just across the board, I think every agency is competing with everyone else. We are able to bring officers on, and then just as quickly we're losing them to other jurisdictions. So that is a challenge, and so that's why we're asking for the pins now. We want to make sure that we have the time to get folks on, get them through the academy, have them trained, and then also as we're starting some of our testing in earlier in 2027, having officers who know the system, who are able to help, when we need folks flagging at lights and things like that, will make a difference and will help with that process as well. So could we delay a year? Potentially, but it's a pretty big risk that we would be taking that we may end up opening up without having the sufficient number of officers available.
And when we say 27, we're talking December of 27, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're, but if we gave you a quarter of the pins, we're still, even if we delayed you a full year, that means you could theoretically start advertising as soon as we approve the budget, which would be next spring. So it would be spring of 26, potentially, and that would still give you almost 2 years, potentially, to start hiring.
Yes. Again, it is a risk that we would not have the sufficient number of officers. I will also note that salaries, in particular in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, are a bit higher, and so that is one of our large concerns, is being able to hire enough officers in those areas.
I'd like to follow up with you on that because I don't want to burn all my questions just on that, but I think it would be helpful to know also and as I mentioned to you, the analysis did not have specifically how much was budgeted for those pins, and it'd be really helpful for us to know that.
Delegate, if I could just on this topic, it is a little bit of deja vu for me because on the Silver Line, we had similar discussion because it was the same issue. We had to get in the line to start recruiting. And I can't remember the exact time, but it was a very long time frame because not only do you recruit, but then you have to retain who you recruit.
Right.
Because in these academies, there's a lot of people fall out over the process. You're constantly doing this. So it does take some time to do this. That's all.
Okay. That's helpful to know. And again, maybe we can have a longer conversation about that. Sort of more, I'm going to also combine another set of questions into one on Mark, which I know is a big surprise that I would be asking you about this. So I just want to, I guess the two questions combined into one, confirm, I have heard you, Mr. Secretary, speak to that we are now going to move forward with the midday service pilot on the Brunswick, but it's not reflected in the budget document. So I just want to make sure that that is consistent, that we are going to go forward with it. And then maybe if you could give just sort of an update. It was a little hard to track some of the Mark capital changes. Stuff was reduced but increased, and just wondering if you could give an update on that. And if you have more of that in writing, would be happy to get that too.
So on the Brunswick line, so I think, I want to clarify, the Secretary, we're still interested in that. We need to have conversations with CSX, and so we've kind of started having those again.
But the assumption is that assuming we can work things out with CSX as we did earlier last year, the budget is still there for it. It's not that has it been taken out?
So it was pulled from the budget because we need to have those conversations with CSX, make sure that we could still get that deal. We also want to really take a good look at, what was the deal that we had and see if we can have some additional conversations with CSX about the best use and investment of funding. Through the MARC Growth and Transformation Plan, the team did a lot of work looking at the Brunswick line in particular, where the pain points are, where it makes sense to do a third track, where like a Silver Spring turnback might make sense. And so we want to see if we can have some conversations with CSX about specific targeted investments that could unlock additional service versus fully committing to, third track throughout the entire line, which would be, $1.7 billion commitment. Right. So we want to have those conversations with CSX. It's an important line. One of the things we also saw in the Growth and Transformation Plan is like the growth potential of the Brunswick line in particular is very high. Yep. So we have a team that is continuing to dive in, continuing to work with CSX. We just want to make sure that we get the right deal for the state, and I think that's an important focus over the next year.
All right, maybe we can follow up more on that because I'm assuming we still need proof of concept that midday service would actually, we think it's going to obviously lead to more ridership, but we want to, and then just sort of the broad MARC.
And overall, MARC, so I'm happy to follow up in writing. We have a lot of investments on the MARC program. I will say the largest are, as mentioned, the Frederick Douglass Tunnel and Susquehanna River Bridge. We partnered with Amtrak for grants on those. So those are both moving forward at this time and will unlock much quicker service on the Penn Line in particular. We've committed to electric locomotives on the Penn Line as well. So there's funding in the budget to purchase electric locomotives. And then for the rest of it is mostly focusing on maintaining our existing equipment and fleet so that we can ensure that we have that good, reliable service.
And then my last question is, I didn't get a chance to ask Administrator Smith this during the MAA hearing. I had to step out for a meeting, but I know we have talked about this before, and I guess maybe just asking for a commitment from both of you, whether there's an opportunity for MAA and MDOT to have conversations with folks at BWI around potentially sharing some of the costs on some of the light rail upgrades. I know the BWI spur in particular obviously is critically important to the economic development and growth of the airport and is one of the ones that's in most need of support. And as we think about opportunities to share costs, that to me strikes me as one place where all have, sort of a shared interest in making sure that that happens. And if there's a way for us to get some of the costs to be borne by some of the folks that are benefiting from, if that light rail line goes down, that's a big impact to a lot of the folks at the airport. So if we could have that conversation and see whether there are opportunities for us to share some of those costs on the light rail improvements.
Definitely can have the conversations. In effect, to try to bring in new money, you'd be coming from the airlines, right?
Well, I would leave that to folks smarter than I on how to do that. But there is, again, money is tight. as we are asking residents of this state to pick up the tab for a lot of these really important infrastructure pieces. We know how important BWI is. There are a lot of corporate interests that make a lot of money off of having a light rail system that functions at BWI. And so in any way, shape, or form, obviously, we don't want to run afoul of FAA regulations. We don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize the health and welfare of the airport. But knowing how critically important the light rail is to all of the organizations and companies that are at the airport, are there ways for us to say, you know, on this specific thing, maybe if you're all willing to chip in, maybe we'll expedite that part of it. It'll help us get that substation fixed further, you know, and quicker. Just trying to see if there's ways for us to share some of those costs.
No, definitely. I think, you know, we should have that discussion, whether it's through the BWI partnership, for instance, you know, which is the business group down there.
Yep.
There's different opportunities to have that discussion. It's a little sensitive, just I know that the pressures on airlines right now and the way that, in particular, the competitive market we are with Dulles and Reagan in Philadelphia, the cost per plane passengers, how they do their math very quickly. So that would impact that number. So that's the only reason I raised that issue.
Yep.
And I do want to note, you know, Administrator Smith and I work really closely together. Some of the improvements at BWI Airport Light Rail Station right now are being undertaken by the airport. You know, we're partnering on that, and they've, you know, right now you kind of walk in and it's a black hole. It's painted black for some reason. So looking to see if we can make some changes and improvements there, more benches, a lot of the things that our riders have been asking for. And so, you know, the MAA has been a fantastic partner there. We're also having some conversations regarding the MARC garage, so not light rail, but MARC, which is, you know, it's expensive for MTA to maintain a garage. And so there are better opportunities to partner with MAA and make sure that, you know, the right party is kind of paying for that based on who benefits for it. So we're absolutely having those conversations right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Mangiani, did you have something?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I agree with my colleague in that we were asking a lot of Marylanders to pay for a lot of things, obviously. And what I don't see feel like when I look at the fare box recovery is that the users are putting forth the amount I think that would be sustainable. And that's one of my questions here is where do we compare, I guess, to other states? I know one of the exhibits had a comparison of how we, with similar systems of similar population size, but is there a study or numbers, and maybe it's in there, I missed it, on how we compare with fare box recovery rates amongst those systems?
We can follow up on that. I know we've seen that. I will say, I think it depends on who you compare us to. Some we compare very well, some not as much. I'll note that, you know, fare enforcement is something that we are really looking at right now to make sure that everyone understands that they need to pay, that they need to pay their fair share. We've made some adjustments on the Metro side, on the fare gates. So our system was set up that you have to tap on and tap off. So you tap when you get on, you tap when you leave. That makes sense in a system like WMATA where it's a zone-based system. MTA is a flat fare, so it doesn't make as much sense. And so one of the things that we'd seen in terms of like failure rate for the gates was that tapping. So we're changing it now. Some of our stations have it changed where it's an easy exit, as we call it. So instead of having to tap on the way out, you're able to walk out because you've paid your fare on the way in. We're able to reuse that equipment on the way in, so ensure that we have more fare gates that are working. We've also assigned more MTA police at our stations as well because we want to, again, remind folks that they need to pay their fares.
And thank you, and I'm glad you're working on that. I think one of my colleagues, it may have been the chairwoman, who brought a similar question up to one of the previous hearings. And I guess my general question would be, what are your concerns, Mr. Secretary, in the future when it comes to the overall quality and basically the future if the fare box, and I know it's a decision the state has made to invest in this public transportation, mass transit. I'm not arguing, I understand that. But do you have concerns, especially post-COVID, if these fares continue, or the fare box recovery, I should say, percentage is as low as 2% for the Metro, for example?
Yeah, again, I think it's something that we've got to make sure we're doing everything to make sure people do pay. That's a good place to start, and make sure the machines work, for instance, you know, if we're letting people go free because the machines aren't working. So there's opportunities there to do that. It is an industry-wide issue, to be frank, particularly in some of these systems like Baltimore, whether it's Philadelphia, or even in the district, the same discussions are going on in terms of the drop of the fare box recovery ratio. And it's something that we're all very focused on because we also think users should pay a portion of the fare.
Well, thank you both for your presentation and being here today.
Thank you, Delegate Mangione. I am moving now to Delegate Metzger, then I'll be going back to Delegate Edelson. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Delegate Edelson for 5 minutes. You go ahead, but go ahead, Mr. Delegate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just promoted you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you folks being here today. I just have two simple questions, really. The first one is the mobility vehicles, are they sometimes run by contractors, independent contractors?
So our mobility service
Yeah.
is provided by, it's fairly complicated. We have three.
I thought that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so we have three main contractors who provide the service. Each of them have subcontractors as well. And so I forget which one, but one of them partners quite a bit with a company called Userve, which is maybe what you're hearing about. And so Userve is what's known as a transportation network company, a TNC like Uber and Lyft, but it has separate requirements for their operators. So they get fingerprinted, they do all the background checks that we're required to do by law. And so sometimes riders, we let them know that, hey, it will be a user vehicle. They're able to opt out of it, but it will be, just a person who's gone through that process will come and pick them up and take them where they need to go.
Thank you for that. I asked that reason for a reason. As you know, last year I asked the same question about 30 buses, and really hadn't been much change on the buses and cleanliness. And I know it's been wintertime, but I also drive it in the spring and the summer. But I noticed the mobilities are a lot cleaner. So that's why I asked if they're independent. The other part of the second question I have is something to do with the red line. Where are we really at with the red line going into the county? Is it going to stop or technically still planning at Bayview Hospital and not going to the county? Is that fair to say?
Yes, so for the red line, we have been sticking as closely as possible to the previous alignment because we had that record of decision, and so trying to simplify the NEPA process. But we have also launched the Eastern Baltimore County Access Study in coordination with Baltimore County, with Baltimore City State Highway, and Maryland Transportation Authority, looking at how we improve access in Eastern Baltimore County. One of the biggest things I think we've seen there is that there is a huge need at Trade Point Atlantic. There's also a huge need in Essex, right? So across the board, Eastern Baltimore County needs improved transit service. And so that's what this study is looking at. We're gearing up to do some public outreach in April or later this spring to update the public on the process, and we'll make sure that our team reaches out to you to provide you an update.
The reason why I asked about the Trade Point or inquired about the Trade Point at Bayview would be thinking about underground, because those folks, they're not talking excited about above ground. I would prefer a monorail myself.
So we're on the Eastern Baltimore County Access Study, we're still very early in the process with, I think, kind of everything on the table. We are, one of the big things we do look at is like the transit readiness, like what does the density look like that can support different levels of investment? And that'll be one of the pieces of conversation that we have as part of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pleasure. We're going to go to Delegate Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a very quick question. Thank you all again for all your great work. Appreciate you being here. I noticed in the MTA budget overview PowerPoint presentation that there was a reference to the fact that 79% of MTA's budget is spent within the state of Maryland as part of the economic driver argument. And I'm just curious, is that not higher because in terms of things like capital investments in vehicles and equipment that are manufactured out of state? That's my assumption, is why it's 21% of it is not in state. But just wondering if you could comment on that.
You've nailed it. Primarily, it is vehicles manufactured out of state. For example, our buses, our New Flyer buses that are manufactured in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We do have other capital investments that are outside of the region.
Does that also account for vendors that you might use in operational activities whose headquarters might be in Delaware, but their people are in Maryland, for example?
We do have some of that. I think Amtrak as well, because Amtrak headquarters is in Pennsylvania, so that may be a portion of that.
Great. Thank you.
I suppose I will have the final try at the apple, which is quickly just to add on to the fare box recovery piece, because this is something for me that I never, ever want to be talking about, because I don't think that it's an appropriate metric necessarily to assess the quality of our system. But when it is as low as it is on some of the services right now, it's impossible for us to ignore it. So I'd just love to get, if we can, from you, additional information over time on the measures that have been taken. For example, we've been receiving information from WMATA because they've had similar challenges about, fare evasion and how much they've been able to decrease it through better gates, et cetera. So I would love to be able to get that from you over time so we can really make sure we're focusing on that issue and trying to get it under control as much as possible. The question that I have for you is, even just on the sort of aesthetic aspects of some of our stations. So you mentioned the importance of reliability, et cetera, efficiency. Part of it, I think, too, is to try to get people to come back and ride our systems because it's very pleasant. And when you're waiting for a bus or the train, to have somewhere enjoyable to sit, whether there's art on the walls, whatever it might be. There's a lot of investment in Baltimore City in the current budget, and frankly, last year's one as well. Are there opportunities for us to tie that investment to our stations in the city, whether it's metro, light rail, to really make it a more pleasant user experience for folks as they're coming in and out?
Absolutely. We've had many conversations with Downtown Partnership as well about how we can partner with some of their efforts that they're doing to kind of beautify and make our stations look better. There's a lot of just simple things that we can do in terms of maintenance as well that our team is doing. I'm forcing my team. We're going to do a full day later this month, going to every metro station and identifying issues that we can kind of do some quick hits on. The budget, I will also note, does have funding for restoring the artwork at each of the metro stations. In many cases, it hasn't been maintained for a number of years, and so we want to make sure it's beautiful artwork that we are maintaining that and making it look good. Similarly, the opportunity to rebuild the light rail stations is part of the light rail modernization program, which gives us an opportunity to unify the paint, right? Like in a lot of cases, we painted it black over the blue, and it's not holding up well, and so being able to kind of redo a lot of that and make it look a lot nicer is absolutely part of the plan.
Great. Thank you both so much. Delegate Solomon with the final bite at the apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had two relatively quick questions. The first, on the Eastern Shore Freight Line piece, the part that jumped out to me was that we don't collect any revenue off of that. So I was just wondering, and I have not gone through the BPW proposal, but educate me as somebody that's not super familiar with that. So is that's a freight line that we own and maintain, but is it used by private companies to transport?
Yes. So we have a lease agreement with Maryland and Delaware Railroads. Am I getting that correct? Thank you. I'm looking at Jacqueline, who's our expert here. And then they have separate agreements with a number of different private entities across the Eastern Shore.
Is that typical that we would allow private companies to use our infrastructure? I mean, again, just knowing CSX and the blood from a stone that they draw from us to use their lines, and being one of the biggest inhibitors of market expansion for decades, we have a freight line that we don't charge for use of, even though we've been paying $50 million almost since 2000 to maintain it.
If I could, can I provide you more detail on that whole arrangement? It is a little complicated, and has different parts to it. So let us put a little presentation together for you real quickly.
That'd be great. And then just the last quick question. The one number that jumped out at me was that our local bus comparison is the operating expenses per vehicle mile. We're better than Metro, but why is it so high? It's the $20 $21 per mile versus, this is on page 12, versus the average of 20. We're good on the other two metrics of operating expenses and per trip, per vehicle revenue mile.
Sorry, which one are we looking
at? The first one here on Exhibit 5, operating expenses per vehicle revenue mile. And it's $21.19 per mile.
Can I get back to you on that one?
Sure.
I have to look at the specifics details of what goes into that.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. and Madam Chair.
Welcome. Members, I think we have asked most of our questions. We will follow up with any other questions in writing. And we're pleased to welcome several people here who are here to testify about your budget. And we have them in the form of panels. Panel number 1 you may come forward, and that is John Laria, Ray Baker, Lester Davis, and Rebecca Altman. And whoever gets there first may begin. And we have 2 minutes per person for testimony. Don't make me cut you off.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, John Laria, Baltimore Regional Transit Commission, you have heard from me at the overall MTA budget hearing of my deep concerns about state of good repair in particular, the fragility of the system, our gratitude for the governor's restoration, and a plea for your support. Today, I brought reinforcements to emphasize that message, and I'm sure you'll hear from them about economic impact on jobs, on public health, on environment. I just wanted to take a moment to give voice to a few transit riders for whom it would be difficult, if not impossible, for them to be here, and hopefully set the stage and the stakes for what you are going to hear today. So here you are. Quote, "The MTA is my only way to get to work downtown. Without the bus, I wouldn't have a job. It's that simple." 2, I live in West Baltimore, and public transit is the only way I can get to my doctor's appointments across town. It's a lifeline for people like me. 3, Baltimore's bus system connects me to school and my part-time job. I couldn't attend college without it. 4, as a senior, I depend on the bus to get to places and see my friends. It keeps me active and independent. And 5, if we want a stronger Baltimore, we need a stronger transit system. It's not just about convenience, it's about opportunity. That last quote echoes Governor Moore's remarks, who has said now multiple times, you can't have economic mobility without physical mobility. This budget is not the maximum we can do. In fact, I think most people think it is the minimum, but it surely needs to be done for the benefit of the people to whom I've just referred, and on whose behalf many of us, I think, today are speaking. So once again, very much appreciate this committee's interest, this committee's support, and your passion for transit in Maryland, and look forward to working with you to bring this budget to become a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for all the advocacy work that you do on behalf of the transit system in Maryland.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Good afternoon, Chair Watson, Vice Chair Edelson, and members of the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. My name is Rebecca Altman, and I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Vice President, University of Maryland Medical Center, and Chief Administrative Officer for the Midtown campus. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in strong support of the Maryland Transit Administration budget for the upcoming fiscal year. As a healthcare leader, I see firsthand the critical role that reliable, accessible, and efficient public transportation plays in supporting both our employees and our patients. Every day, thousands of healthcare professionals, including nurses, physicians, technicians, support staff, residents, medical students, depend on public transit to reach our hospitals and provide essential life-saving care. Additionally, as one of the largest providers of healthcare in the city and across the state, many of our patients, particularly those from underserved communities, rely on the MTA services to access medical appointments, treatments, and emergency care. The University of Maryland Medical Center Midtown campus is located along the light rail service line, literally on Howard Street, which is a critical and vital area of economic development for us and the community. The public transit is an essential resource for our staff and patients we serve. Since my tenure at Midtown campus, Administrator Holly Arnold and her team have been instrumental in bridging transportation gaps and ensuring Marylanders have the access to dependable transit system. I want to express my gratitude to Administrator Arnold and her team for their continued partnership. A well-funded MTA is essential for ensuring healthcare access. Many of our patients lack personal vehicles and rely on public transportation for critical services such as dialysis, chemotherapy, and routine checkups. Gaps in transit services can result in delayed or missed medical care, negatively impacting health outcomes. Supporting our healthcare workers, hospitals operate 24/7, and our workforce depends on reliable transportation, particularly for evening and overnight shifts when transit options are more limited. Advancing health equity, investing in robust transit options helps eliminate disparities by ensuring all patients, regardless of income or location, can access timely and necessary health care. And finally, enhancing emergency preparedness. During public health crisis, severe weather, or other emergencies, a reliable public transportation system is a lifeline for both our patients and our hospital staff. And I thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ray Baker. I'm the Maryland Director of the Baltimore, D.C. Building Trades Council. I've submitted written testimony on the piece, so I won't belabor with all the specifics, but I echo the solidarity and the encouragement that this legislative session we pass the budget as requested, specifically because there are a number of projects that stretch across our state that many of your constituents who are members of our labor unions will get the pride and opportunity to rebuild safely infrastructure, roads, and highways that are vital to Marylanders. We know during this difficult time that we want to make sure we're opening up opportunities to economic mobility, as we've heard from a testimony earlier. That economic opportunity will be provided by the investments we make here, and the investments we make here will produce better outcomes and opportunities for our members who are taxpaying citizens of the state of Maryland. So with that, I do hope for that we're able to pass the budget as requested this legislative session and invest in the Marylanders so our members can rebuild vital infrastructure for transportation in this state. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, Mr. Edelson, Vice Chair, I want to thank the members of this esteemed committee. My name is Lester Davis, and I serve as a commissioner of the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. But today, I'm here in my capacity as an executive at CareFirst Blue Cross Blue Shield, largest health insurer in the Mid-Atlantic region. And transportation, as a number of us here know, is really a healthcare issue. If you think about the thing that impacts health more so than anything, it's really the environment and the circumstance as someone moves through that environment. And so those social drivers of health are really key to having a robust health outcome and then a robust economy. As the state's largest insurer, CareFirst has direct visibility into how regional barriers to transportation lead to missed or delayed doctors or clinical appointments, fewer prescription refills, and overall poor health outcomes for the people that we care about. All of this contributes to an increased economic burden on the healthcare system and overall community health, directly affecting people's access to much-needed healthcare services. When we decided as a company to invest in a workforce development pilot to bring much-needed jobs and economic opportunity to West Baltimore, we were intentional about the location that we were selecting, and we were intentional about co-locating that investment proximate to nearby transit. This was an enhancement to public transportation to alleviate the existing disparities. There's a stat that is very sobering and one that we often cite, that if you live in the region, in the region, and you want to get to 100% of the jobs and you have a car, you can do that within 1 hour, no problem. You can get to 100% of those job opportunities with a car within 1 hour, no problem. When you rely on public transportation, those opportunities drop down to 9%. So you effectively eliminated from 90%, over 90% of the opportunities just due to the lack of comprehensive transportation, which I think we all can agree is unacceptable. CareFirst aligned with the Move Maryland Coalition, and we respectfully request your support for MDOT's budget and associated revenue adjustments to provide safe and reliable transportation system that catalyzes the state's economic success. I think we've heard a number of times you can't have the economic mobility and success of the state without that tie-in to comprehensive transportation. The final CTP relies on an additional $420 million in new annual state revenues that totals nearly $700 million in annual investments. And so we come to you collectively to say, one, we want to thank you. We believe that what you have before you is a good starting point for comprehensive transit in the state, and we respectfully would ask that this committee would deem it appropriate to move that appropriation forward.
And we thank all of you for coming today and appreciate your testimony. And what sticks with me is that 9% number, so thank you for bringing that up. All right, we'll move on to panel number 2. and that is Mike Kelly, Patrick Hosford, and Scott Spencer, and Ronald Hartman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Kelly, I'm the Executive Director of the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, the Regional Council of Governments for the Baltimore region and the host of our region's Metropolitan Planning Organization. Really a me too here, 2 quick points to make. I think often in the discussion of MTA, it's lost how large the system is. Our region is roughly the 20th biggest metropolitan area in the country. MTA service is the 15th largest by most metrics. MTA is a huge, huge system and vitally important to the region. Secondly, in terms of this budget, I really want to highlight the investment in the light rail. There's $1.4 billion in this budget for vehicle replacement, maintenance repairs, track replacement, and stationary improvements. And this is really the first major investment in our light rail since the system was built. It's probably 20 years too late, and without it, we're likely looking at a failing light rail system, which would be crippling to the region's economy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Scott Spencer. I'm on the board of the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance, a member of the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission, and a part of the Move Maryland Coalition. I support the administration's full funding proposal for the Maryland Transit Administration. MTA recently shared information from an origin and destination survey with approximately 15,000 responses and found that an overwhelming percentage of bus, light rail, and metro riders, between 82 and 90%, identify as low income. Most are also minorities. 86% do not have ready access to a car, so they are dependent on MTA for their livelihood. Before the administration proposed full funding, MTA's original 2025 to 2030 CTP had over $670 million in deferred maintenance over 6 years. In just one example, deferred maintenance of a traction power substation, or TPSS, that's the box that makes the juice run, makes the system run, as noted in the maintenance deferral chart, could mean system shutdowns if there are any TPSS failures. MTA is currently operating with the minimum number of TPSSs to provide service. That kind of catastrophic system failure would mean no light rail service at all from Hunt Valley to the airport. That is not a human failure, that is an investment failure. And that could mean a lot of economic disruption. For those living paycheck to paycheck, that's a lot to gamble on. That kind of system disruption could lead to housing instability due to lack of income for transit-dependent riders. This is a question of equity. Low-income and minority people who rely on transit system deserve to have a quality service, just like those who demand quality roadways to move people and goods, and just like those who ride WMATA. Fully funding MTA means people can ride to life's functions with dignity and not desperation. All of the people of Maryland deserve just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Patrick Hosford, Director of Research and Strategy at the Greater Baltimore Committee. On behalf of GBC, I'm asking you to support the fiscal year 2026 Maryland Transit Administration budget as provided and encourage sustained investment in equitable transit services in the Baltimore region. As the leading voice for the private sector in the Baltimore region, GBC actively works with private and public sector partners to grow a dynamic and inclusive regional economy. And an efficient, effective transportation network is fundamental in this mission for regional economic growth and competitiveness. Though this year poses difficult fiscal decisions, sustained investment in the MTA has significant statewide economic benefits. In an average year directly, the MTA supports over 9,600 jobs and over $1.7 billion in GDP throughout the state. Indirectly, our regional transit hubs provide significant opportunities to augment the state's public investments and spur private contributions, especially in the form of mixed-use developments, which are shown to lower transportation costs, boost both commercial and residential property values, and stimulate business activity. We're pleased that the draft budget successfully restores funding for MTA state of good repairs, including the rehabilitation of the light rail system, as mentioned, and we recognize that further investment is needed. Ensuring that the MTA has adequate funding to maintain transit investment is needed. we are looking at those expansion projects, especially like those of the Baltimore Red Line, and want to make sure that those are possible with increased investment. Most importantly, business and workers rely on a modern, trustworthy, and safe transportation network, and it's a quintessential ingredient for economic mobility and for Baltimore's economic growth and prosperity. So for this reason, we hope you issue a favorable report on the budget, and thank you for making transportation a priority this year.
Madam Chairperson, Mr. Vice President, and members of the Vice Chair and members of the committee, I'm Ron Hartman, and I'm representing the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. I've been a member of the board since its inception, lived almost my entire life in Harris County. I served as the MTA administrator for about a decade in the late 80s and 1990s, and I oversaw the completion of the subway and the light rail system. I came today to share a perspective that so many others have right here about how your decisions really do impact things, and they're things that I care about. Robust public transportation, as everybody before me has said, is essential. The budgets that come before you each year are really related to the performance of the system and how the people that use them every day are going to be able to move around. More is needed. We recognize the serious financial challenges. So I'm pleased to be here to support the budget proposal because despite those challenges, it makes an important investment. We've seen investments in the I-95 toll lanes, in the widening of Interstate 81, Terminal A at BWI. Those are all important, but equally important, and maybe in some respects more important, is looking after what we already have. Deferred investment in repairs and replacing infrastructure results in breakdowns that occur, leaving people behind. People don't get to work. People don't get to doctor's appointments. This year, the budget is definitely a step in the right direction and makes those investments. And for that reason, the Alliance has joined the MOVE Coalition that calls on you to approve the governor's proposal. When I was at the MTA, we used to tell our people, if somebody asks what you do, rather than say I operate a bus or I fix signals, say I help people live their lives. I help people get to work. I help people get to school. I help them take advantage of what the state offers. We appreciate your recognition of that, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. And thank you to panel number 2. It's very impressive to see so many people here from the Move Maryland Coalition, and we thank you for spending your afternoon with us. We have 2 more panels. The third panel is Lindsay Mendelson and Jimmy Rouse, Mike McMillan, and Brian Weibel. Please come forward, and whoever is first can start.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Mendelson, and I'm the Senior Transportation Campaign Representative with the Maryland Sierra Club. Sierra Club believes that having a well-functioning public transit system is a critical way to cut the pollution that fuels the climate crisis and contributes to respiratory illnesses like asthma, especially in children. Investing in public transit and transit-oriented development can help us build more sustainably and efficiently, which can help us protect green space, mitigate stormwater runoff, and reduce the costs that state and local governments have to pay for utilities and infrastructure per person. Sierra Club is a member of the MOVE Coalition, and we support MDOT's proposal to raise $400 million in the BRFA for critical transportation needs, including funding needed to meet the minimum state of good repair for MTA. Our support for this package is contingent on MDOT's project prioritization bill and the Transportation and Climate Alignment Act advancing at the same time to ensure that the money we are spending is doing it so in ways that align with the state's goals. Even with the $420 million revenue package, MTA still does not have enough funding to fully meet its state of good repair needs, the construction funding for the Red Line, and also is proposing to delay the zero-emission bus transition process for nearly 10 years. Therefore, Sierra Club is supportive of additional measures, such as the Fair Share Act, that can provide additional funding for MTA, as well as WADA and the locally operated transit systems across the state. Marylanders want more investment in public transit. According to a poll we recently commissioned with Gonzalez Research and Media Services, 88% of Marylanders say they want the state investing more in projects that give people additional choices to get to work, school, healthcare, and other locations by taking public transit, walking, and biking. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Rouse. Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and
committee members. I'm here representing Transit Choices, a nonprofit which for the past 12 years has been advocating for the creation of a first-rate transit system in the Baltimore region. We are here today in support of this year's MDOT budget and associated revenue adjustments. The proposed budget would fund many MTA initiatives. These include new Metro cars and station improvements, including maintenance of the aging escalators, which enable riders to access the trains. New light rail vehicles and associated infrastructure to replace the present trains, which are at the end of their lifespan. More buses to support their fleet and help make this system both more reliable and frequent. Without this money, we can look forward to more frequent breakdowns in the transit systems and accompanying disruptions of service. That result will make it harder for citizens to get to their jobs and schools on time in a reliable manner. The cost of doing nothing is catastrophic. Without maintaining what we have in good repair, we will not be eligible for future federal funding for transit projects. In our recent brochure, which we hand distributed to the office of every delegate and senator, this is a copy, Transit Choices argues that the cost of creating a first-rate transit system for the region will be cheaper for all Maryland taxpayers than the cost of maintaining the status quo. Please read the brochure and discover why this is true. Baltimore should be an economic engine for the state, creating jobs, drawing investment, and increasing our tax base. It is being held back by its high rate of poverty and crime. Studies have shown that the biggest obstacle for people trying to escape cycles of poverty across America is a lack of access to good jobs and educational opportunities because of poor public transit. Read our brochure and see our argument about why creating a great public transit system would reduce the tax burden for all Marylanders. Let's start by improving the governor's addition of funds for transit in this budget. I want to say that we have been so impressed dealing with Holly Arnold and her staff at the MTA over the last few years. We are lucky to have such intelligent, hardworking, efficient people at the head of this agency. Let's give them the money they need to do their job. We're asking each of you to support the governor's transportation budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Next.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Michael McMillan, President and Business Agent for Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1300, who represents over 3,000 employees of the Maryland Transit Administration. It is our members that move Maryland every day. We are proud members also of the Move Maryland Coalition. We also strongly support the governor's transportation budget, but we need the General Assembly to show up the future of Maryland's transportation system. MTA needs the funding necessary to recover, grow, and expand and meet the needs of this state. We also want to have them to protect existing investments in transit, Maryland's climate, housing, job creation, and land use goals. Fully build, operate, and maintain a system that we actually need. The solution to growing ridership is safe, frequent, and reliable transportation. This is one of the most effective ways that we cut down on car trips. Cuts to transit systems, as we know, leads to decreased ridership and future disinvestment. If we look at WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, back in 2022 and 2023, what they did was limit the longest wait times that someone might have for rail service to 15 minutes. They followed up this with expanded bus service levels on important routes. WMATA went from having one of the worst pandemic fall down of ridership to now being the nation's leading of the post-pandemic ridership recovery. Riders want safe, frequent, and reliable transit system. If they can't get it, they won't choose transit. As far as MTA goes, the budget is concerned. The concern for the budget. This means that more money is needed in funding the MTA's operation and maintenance needs. Also, we asked this committee to investigate exactly how much it will cost for MTA to operate, maintain, and staff a system that can guarantee frequent, safe, and reliable transit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Brian Wyvil, Amalgamated Transit Union Local 689, here also on behalf of Local 1300. To echo the comments that were just made by President McMillan, the question in our heads right now is what would it take to build the system that this region needs? One of the worst things we could do is underinvest, which was obviously what happened for the preceding couple of decades. The moves over the last couple of years to reinvest in MTA have made tremendous gains, but also there is a consequence from underinvesting, which would fail to get the full benefit of the Maryland Transit Administration. I would like to repeat that Maryland has set very ambitious climate, housing, job creation, and land use goals. Each one of those depends on the Maryland Transit Administration getting the absolute best return that it can, and that return requires an upfront investment. So add our voice to the chorus of organizations that are saying the governor's budget proposal is great. It is a massive step forward in the direction that we need, but we need more. And that's why we ask you as a committee to look in and get the answers on what would it take to build a system that could have 15-minute frequencies? What would it take to have a system that could help the state meet its climate, housing, job creation, and transportation goals? So we thank you for your time, and we ask for the money that has been asked for and a little bit more.
How much more?
I do not have that answer, unfortunately.
Neither do we, but we're working on it. Thank you very much to panel 3. Did everyone get a chance to testify? Okay, so we're moving on now to panel 4, and I believe this is the last panel. We may have some individuals to get to still. Lucia Islas, Paul Sturm, Lauren Bird, Sydney Trainham, and Anna Ellis. Whoever's first may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Sturm. I'm wearing 2 hats today. I chair the Downtown Baltimore Residents Advocacy Network. We have 40,000 people living in downtown Baltimore. Many of us no longer have cars, or if we have cars, we would love to ride transit much more than we do if the service were frequent and reliable. The other hat I'm wearing is I'm managing the Better Transit Now campaign. As some of you may know, 2 weeks ago, the spectrum of Baltimore transit riders and stakeholders gathered across the way on Lawyers Mall. We all took an afternoon off from work or school or what have you, and our message was this: Baltimore's unreliable public transportation system disadvantages current riders, discourages new riders, and damages the entire Baltimore region. Workers live in fear of losing their jobs because of scheduled buses and trains that are late or sometimes don't show up at all. Baltimore City public school students miss considerable class time because they're waiting as early as 6:30, 7 in the morning for buses that, again, are late or don't show up at all. Seniors, we've heard this earlier, miss medical appointments that are critical, again, because of late transit, and on and on and on. The hardship stories go on and on and on. But there's a bigger picture here, and that's this. Baltimore is the only major city up and down the East Coast that continues to lose population while our peer cities, Boston, Philadelphia, D.C., New York, and Atlanta, are gaining population. And what's one of the fundamental differences between Baltimore and those cities? Those cities have comprehensive, reliable public transportation systems in a way that Baltimore does not. And of course, we support and urge you to support what the governor has restored in the budget, in contrast to what was the cuts that were proposed in the CTP. But I would add to what was said earlier, what's in that budget is not nearly enough. We need a much greater investment in the Baltimore region's public transportation system so that MTA leadership could provide the service that we know they want to provide and Baltimore region transit riders desperately need. And like the other cities I mentioned, Baltimore has Major League Baseball and Major League Football. But unlike those other cities, we don't have a Major League public transportation system. We have a minor league public transportation system, and that is not acceptable. And yes, we know this is a challenging budget environment, but we also know that government always finds money to support what it values. Up and down the Northeast Corridor, 4 of our sister states, specifically Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, all found additional money, additional revenue sources, or created additional revenue sources to invest in their major urban area public transit systems. So my closing message is this. To our Democratic friends in the room, remember that you are Democrats. We know what the Republican playbook is when it comes to transit. Larry Hogan followed it to a T when he canceled the Red Line, setting Baltimore back a generation. And to our Republican friends in the room, believe Wes Moore when he says that Maryland cannot thrive unless Baltimore thrives. The Baltimore region, Greater Baltimore, is Maryland's population center, economic engine, and cultural mecca. We need a healthy, thriving Baltimore region for the state of Maryland to thrive as well. And it truly is long past time for the state of Maryland to value public transportation and the people who use public transportation or would like to use public transportation if service were frequent and reliable in a way that it does not, or historically has not up until now. The Baltimore region needs better transit now. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Hello. My name is Lauren Bemmy Bird. I am the Transportation Community Organizer for No Boundaries Coalition, which is a resident-led nonprofit in Central West Baltimore. And as has been stated by many other people up here, we as well are supporters of the governor's additions to the bill and a part of the MOVE Coalition. But today I am also speaking to you all as a part of the frequently mentioned underserved community. I am a single mother. I am a Black woman. I live in Park Heights, and I have a 13-year-old daughter who is a prospective violinist, waiting to hear her acceptance from BSA. So I have personally experienced many of the issues that we discussed that are directly affecting people based on our current system and what some of budget cuts or lack of budget infusion would do. I was a cashier at Whole Foods when the pandemic landed itself on our society, and that directly affected my ability to get to work because I actually frequently experienced anxiety attacks riding public transit, unaware of what my safety and my health was being affected by. I was a bartender at CFG Bank Arena at its inception in Baltimore City, and had the ability to utilize the light rail from my home in Park Heights, from Cold Spring Station to the Howard Station that lets off right at the door. But at the same time, what that did was affected me directly at times when there were major shutdowns in the light rail, and I did not have the funds to be able to get myself from Park Heights to downtown. And being a bartender, a lot of our income is tips. My position now as a community organizer is the first salaried position I have ever held at 40 years old. And so what that has done is allowed me to be able to establish myself, but it's a slow process. And so utilizing public transportation helps financially, but very often does not meet the needs of my position, having to frequently attend community meetings and various parts of the city and come to Annapolis during legislative session. So I utilize rideshare often, which is extremely expensive and quite honestly something people don't often talk about, kind of triggering and traumatizing. I've been in 2 different car accidents in rideshare that were of no fault of my own. And so that made it very difficult at times to plan to spend my money to then also be at risk of someone else's driving abilities and skills. I also am very interested in highlighting that TOD opportunities, transit-oriented development is a significant part of the discussion right now, especially in Baltimore City, where we're looking at development happening on Pennsylvania Main Streets, where there is an Upton station there, as well as Park Heights. There's a lot of development happening in that area, and we don't talk about the lack of accessibility to transportation in some of those areas. I mentioned the Cold Spring Station. Anyone who's familiar with that area will know that it's not an easily accessible light rail station at all, and it's actually the closest to many of our high school students in that area. So I wanted to say thank you again to Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and the committee for hearing us today and our discussions. And again, I reiterate, I do support the governor's budget plans and the need for more financial investment in our transit system for the city of Baltimore to thrive in ways that we intend.
And it's Ms. Bird, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And what organization are you with?
So I'm the transportation community organizer for No Boundaries Coalition.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, you're doing a good job in your first salaried position.
Thank you very much.
We also tell your daughter we wish her all the luck in getting in that position at BSA.
Yes, ma'am. I look forward to being able to bring her down to perform here in Annapolis for you all one day.
That'd be lovely.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and we're moving on now to...
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Ellis.
Ms. Ellis.
I am a lifelong Baltimore Transit rider. I volunteer with the Transform Maryland Transportation Coalition and the Better Transit Now campaign because I want to see Maryland invest in a great public transit system. We don't have one now. The MTA budget that you're reviewing affects people across the Baltimore region who use the bus, train, or MTA mobility to get to school, work, or medical appointments. Too often, it's unreliable. I've waited more than 30 minutes for a subway train that's supposed to run every 8 minutes. And on any given day, the MTA light rail has fewer than half of its rail cars in service, resulting in one-car trains and cut runs. The unreliable trains are a direct result of decisions made by governors in the legislature years ago to postpone funding for state of good repair projects for MTA. In comparison to the DC Metro, in 2016, the Baltimore subway broke down more than 4 times as often as DC's. But by 2023, the Baltimore subway broke down more than 35 times as often as DC's Metro. This huge improvement in DC's subway service was due in part to the 2018 Maryland legislature passing the Maryland Metro Funding Act, which greatly helped reduce the DC Metro's breakdowns. Governor Moore's proposed transportation budget is a step in the right direction by making badly needed investments in the state of good repair of the MTA's train and bus systems. It includes fully funding the MTA light rail modernization project, which will replace the light rail cars by 2031. For that reason, I want to encourage you to approve the governor's proposal, but we need that and more. I ask you to support these investments and to continue to find more ways to invest in the capital needs of MTA. Thank you.
Thank you, and I believe that is everyone on this panel, and we want to thank you again also for being here. We had 21 people signed up, which is quite a lot for the MTA budget and really unprecedented in my time here. So we thank you for your dedication and for being here with us and taking the time away from work and school and everything else, children. Is there anyone that I missed in the audience? Okay, so we will be closing this hearing, and then we will be reconvening in 5 minutes for a voting session. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Okay, we'll be ready to go once it gets quiet, or you can just kind of tell them. Excuse me, everyone.
We're going to go into a voting session now, so we just need your silence for a couple minutes. You're welcome to stay and watch. Just voting on one bill. All right, committee members, we are here to vote on House Bill 84, and I'm going to turn it over to our legislative analyst to summarize the bill for us and also the amendments to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Watson. Again, today we're voting on HB 84, Delegate Edelson's bill. This is the Transportation and Climate Alignment Act of 2025. This bill does have two amendments, but first I'm going to go over a quick bill summary and then we'll get into the amendments. So this bill requires MDOT to take various actions, including implementing multimodal transportation programs, undertaking offsetting activities, and conducting impact assessments to reduce or offset vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions associated with major highway expansion projects. The bill takes effect July 1st, 2025. There are two amendments to the bill. Amendment number 1 is technical, and amendment number 2 makes clarifying changes as to what constitutes project eligibility for assessments, including raising the project cost threshold to $100 million. It requires the department to perform impact assessments in addition to multimodal transportation programs for each project, adds certain reporting requirements, and makes other clarifying and conforming changes to departmental duties.
Move the amendments.
Second. The amendments have been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the amendments? All right, we can call a vote on the amendments. Just all in favor? All in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. Say aye. Okay, that is a unanimous vote. So proud of that. And now we will move on to the amended bill.
I move the bill.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor, an aye, and raise your hand. Aye. All those opposed? And let the record show that it is 3-2, the bill passes. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned, and can you please just come up here for 1 minute before we leave?